Thanks, Chair. What we have here is a massive transfer of powers and an erosion of democratic rights, and this charade here today is really nothing more than a sop and a pretence that our Parliament is discussing it, and I frankly find it quite insulting. As George Monbiot has put it, where once trade agreements promoted free trade by removing trade tariffs, now they promote the interests of transnational capital by downgrading the defence of human health, the natural world, labour rights and the poor and vulnerable from predatory corporate practices. And that's really what we've had here, because this is the neoliberal project unleashed, the end game of it, if you like, where there's been a chipping away at many of the rights that people came to expect. The damage of that is found in polluted rivers and seas, overheating economy, temporary low-paid jobs, air pollution and the transfer of wealth from the majority to the hands of a very small and even shrinking minority. And I think really with this deal on the table, what we're talking about is the social democratic facade of the EU being finally dismantled. Now, obviously, the government and indeed other international leaders have said to those of us who've raised objections that, don't be worrying about it now, it's not going to be as bad as ye all think. But in actual fact, we know that that's not the case, based on what happened with other agreements like the Trans-Pacific Partnership and so on, where we heard exactly the same thing. And once the details were published, not only were they not so bad, they were actually worse than what people thought. And clearly in this deal, we've been given a variety of assurances about the investment state dispute settlement, obviously renamed the investment court system, which is just cosmetics really. We've been given assurances about public services, GMOs and food standards, but it's very difficult to take those assurances at face value given what's happened with the TPP and other agreements. And I think that's a fundamental problem here, is that there's a lot of problems and reassurances which often turn out to be utterly worthless. I mean, for example, last May, talking about the TPP, Barack Obama said critics warned that parts of this deal would undermine American regulation, food safety, worker safety, even financial regulations. They're making this stuff up. It's just not true. No trade agreement is going to force us to change our laws. But of course he was utterly wrong, because when the text of the TPP was published, it emerged that many of the commitments they were talking about had been stood on its head. And you, Minister, told the Jobs Committee back in May that everything was going to be grand, we shouldn't be worried about it, that the negotiations were utterly transparent. That's not true. They haven't been transparent. We've seen sight of the Commission's position papers and negotiating texts, but we haven't seen the US side, and we certainly haven't had full and free public access to the draft of the agreement. Now, the fact that MEPs now are able to get access to a draft text that they can only do in confidential reading rooms where they're stored, and even if they do go to the bother of looking at them, they can't tell the public what they've actually seen in them, or take notes beyond what they can scribble down with a pen and paper when they go in. Is that transparency and accountability? If everything's so great with this deal, why is it shrouded in secrecy? And the only conclusion you can come to is that it isn't, and we can base that on the facts of what's happened in other trade agreements.